welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò, for this episode of the many of Le Conversazioni, a literary festival that became much more than a literary festival, founded by Antonio Monda and Davide Azzolini. I had the fortune for the first time to be in Capri this past summer, where I discussed with Marina Sagona her beautiful book on the women of the Divine Comedy. And it was a trip, and I understand why the people who went there once keep going, and if they could, they would keep going and going and going again. I mean, there is Capri, there is Antonio and Jackie as the hosts of the festival. You're surrounded by these writers that are in a totally relaxed mode. They're not competing for anything. They're not trying to sell their books. They're in the best state of mind to pleasantly discuss with you their work. So it's a fantastic experience. But it's not only Capri. There are many cities all over the world, and probably in the slides that preceded this one, you saw some of them. This specific episode of Le Conversazioni at Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò features a conversation on forgotten gems. And as you know, the concept is like discovering, for many of us, or rediscovering for some of us, some films that for any reason have been forgotten, neglected, maybe not received with the due attention that they deserve. And of course, that is according to the opinions, very authoritative opinion, of our guests, Antonio Monda and Stuart Klawans. As we always do, we're going to keep the introductions and the presentations very short. You have the full biography of both of them on our website. Antonio Monda, as you know, is the founder of Le Conversazioni. He was for several years the director of the film festival in Rome. He's a cultural correspondent for La Repubblica and for Rai. And he also teaches at NYU when he can. Where are the students of Antonio? Very good. You see, he has students. Antonio, a volte mettono in dubbio questa cosa. He has students. He has students, and they're very good. Because sometimes I go teach in his place, and I can tell you that they're excellent students. So we're very happy to have Antonio back. He's also a writer. As you might know, he's undertaking this monumental creative effort to write 10 books dedicated to each to a decade in the history of New York. And the new one is in the manuscript phase, and it's going to come out in the spring, right, Antonio, in Italy. And of these books, I think one has been translated into English, Antonio? The Unworthy. Okay. And Stuart Klawans is the legendary critic of The Nation. He won all sorts of awards for his work as a cinematographic critic. He has already been here with Antonio in conversation, and we wanted him back. He's brilliant. His reviews are balanced, deep, and always insightful, and they help you really to understand and to find out things that you otherwise would have not noticed. So the Stuart's last book, that I think it's either forthcoming or about to come out, Stuart? About to come out, is on Preston Sturges, and it's entitled Crooked But Never Common. Ladies and gentlemen, before I call them to the stage, I assume all of you are cinephiles, right? That's the reason you're here. Okay. Tomorrow night, we have a very, very important program. We're going to screen an old film. It's 100 years old. It's called The Betrothed, and it's an adaptation of Alessandro Manzoni's novel, I Promessi Sposi. It's a silent film from 1922, and we commissioned a Japanese-American musician to write a score for it that will be performed live here by a quartet. So if you have any interest in silent cinema, that is a very good film. Mario Bonard was a man who knew what he was doing, even if he never reached the levels of celebrity of many of his contemporaries. So that's tomorrow evening at 6. It's also going to be followed by sort of a party, our holiday Christmas party, and I'm going to make my famous zabaglione for all of you present. So that's the further incentive. But you have to come see the movie first. Otherwise, no zabaglione. And now, finally, it's time to welcome to the stage Antonio Monda and Stuart Klawans.
Buonasera, good evening. Benvenuto, Stuart.
Good evening. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Antonio. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Stefano. Stuart and I rarely disagree. We have very similar taste. We're talking about movies. But tonight we picked very different films. Before I start, this series called Forgotten Gems actually starts from something that I did more than 20 years ago at the MoMA. I want to recognize in the audience Larry Cardish because I worked with him. And you certainly remember it was called Second Act. Because Larry and Marilee Bandi at the time accepted an idea that was, let's rediscover forgotten films. That was called Second Act, and the title came from the very famous line by Francis Scott Fitzgerald, "There is no second act in American lives." I disagree, probably he disagreed. But let's see now what happens with this variation of the same idea. Let's start with Stuart's first film, which is an Italian film, and I'm happily surprised by this choice. I'll tell you why later.
Did you want me to explain a little about
yes,
what
yes.
just so the scene is comprehensible to you? This is a film about a small city in Italy, Chieti, that is rumored to be about to organize an orchestra, and the choir master for the town has been rumored to be about to win the job of being the new head of the orchestra. He and his wife have just had a celebratory party. Now arriving late is the troublemaker. So now we can watch.
Let's watch the scene. Then the title of the film is Sciopèn, and it's directed by Luciano Odorisio, and it's 1982. And the actors are Tino Schirinzi, that gentleman, Michele Placido, and Giuliana De Sio. I just want to say that the film won the Golden Lion in Venice as opera prima, as a debut film. Why did you pick Chopin? How did you discover Chopin? It's not even very known
Larry
in Italy.
Cardish is sitting in the audience.
Is it you?
Yes, this film was shown in New Directors' New Films in 1983. And that's where I saw it. In 1983, it had a small, short run that New Yorker Films gave it under the alternative title Dear Maestro, which I don't think helped it. And then it disappeared. And I've always had very warm feelings toward this film. The scene that matters most to me comes at the end, and I couldn't do an excerpt from that because you have to have seen the film to get the emotional impact of the finale. The finale is a scene of reconciliation between these two musicians, these two old friends, where they understand things about a situation without one of them understands everything, the other doesn't quite understand. It's almost like Henry James, how much passes between them without being said. It's just a beautiful, beautiful scene, unlike the chaos that I've just chosen for you to see. And I know that you expected me to choose something that was not shot like TV.
This was shot in Super 16, as you noticed. And
but with the TV shot sequence too. I mean, it's
absolutely.
very, yeah.
Absolutely. Do you remember the opening sequence? Because I think it's my favorite. The film is, the location is Chieti, which is a small town in Abruzzi, not exactly the most beautiful town in Italy, very small. And the opening shot is Chieti seen from from the distance through the windows of a car, and it's raining in autumn. It's the saddest theme as you can imagine, and the film opens with New York, New York. This is the idea.
Yes, sung with a strong Italian accent, yes.
And it's one of the beautiful films made about living in a small provincial town, which is a typical themes of Italian cinema, things of I Vitelloni, of course, of I Basilischi by Lina Wertmüller, but this is one of the greatest. And what is sad about this film, it's a very tragic story, although it's narrated through comedy, is that Odorisio's career is not very different from Michele Placido's career in the film, meaning that after the victory in Venice, everybody believed that he would become one of the great maestros of Italian cinema. He didn't. He made another film called Magic Moments, and I worked in that film as assistant director. Because I wanted to work with him, because I believe he was going to become, a great master. And then he worked only for television. Now he's 80 and he writes novels. And it's a pity because he was a talented filmmaker. Not with a great visual style, but I think he's a great screenwriter.
A wonderful screenwriter, and the visual style, again, at the end, the visual style is much more calm, much more settled. It gives you an opportunity to stand back and look at the characters and understand a little of what they understand of each other and what they don't. It doesn't have, again, this particular type of comic chaos, which I also chose for another film that we've got.
Okay, we'll go there.
But we'll get to that later.
My first choice is a Russian film by one of the greatest living director, Aleksandr Sokurov. The title is The Sun. Let's watch the clip and then I'll try to say why I picked this film. This is a very tragic film. It's about the Emperor Hirohito, who must surrender to General Douglas MacArthur after the bombing of Tokyo and, of course, after the 2 atomic bombs. Nobody remembers that the bombing of Tokyo was even bloodier than the 2 atomic bombs. 100,000 people died in 3 days. Hiroshima, approximately 90,000, and 60,000 in Nagasaki. After that, Hirohito decided to surrender. But his greatest tragedy is not only surrendering Japan, is declaring that he is no longer God. Because for their religion, the emperor was God. This is what this film is about. And I think this is one of the most impressive and original film ever made. I like also the style. It's peaceful, the pace is very slow. This is a film about rituals, about calm, about tragedy. And I remember that Susan Sontag wrote that by far Sokurov is the greatest living director. I don't know if she was right, but definitely is in the pantheon today. Do you like him as well?
You want to disagree with Susan Sontag? You're going to go ahead and do that? No.
Eventually with you. I know you love Russian arc.
Don't mess with that. No, I think that everything about this is remarkable. Everything about what we just saw. The performance is amazing. The choice of gesture. I mean, what gestures would you use to decide that you're giving up your divinity? It's very the strangeness of the hieratic gestures of raising his hands, the sense almost of playing with it. I'm just testing this out. Can I feel my divinity leave me? The very Sokurov clouds outside the window. Because he loves having those gray, cloudy backgrounds, which he manufactures himself. He doesn't rely on God to do that for him. He'll do that. And then the way that Hirohito goes to the window, and then just the imponderable things that happen in the course of the scene. Like the table moves. How does the table, it moves. It's here one moment, then it's over there. It's just amazing, the whole thing. But I'm interested that because of the divinity, but also you could have chosen Moloch.
Yes. I mean, this is part of a trilogy about power. Yeah. One is about Hitler, Moloch. Yeah. The other one is about Lenin, if I remember well.
Lenin and Stalin together.
Lenin and Stalin together. But I think this is by far the best. Sokurov is an uneven filmmaker, but when he's good, he's really one of the best. Yeah. When he was preparing the film, he was told by Nagisa Oshima, the great Japanese filmmaker, don't reveal the name of the actor because they will kill him in Japan, because he would portray the Emperor Hirohito. And in fact, in Japan, it's almost unknown, this film, to protect the actors and protect the cast. It's quite crazy, if you think.
It's almost unknown everywhere. I looked it up. It grossed worldwide something like $213,000.
How do you like the other films, like Russian Ark? Because it's very different, the style. As you know, Russian Ark is basically one long shot.
He's made films in any number of styles. I mean, that's one of the things that's amazing about him is how variable he's been, how malleable his style is. No, I think Russian Ark is it's almost an ontological break in filmmaking. I don't know if you've seen it. Russian Ark is 90-minute tour through the Hermitage Museum, and it is all done in a single take, literally in one take. The cameraman got a hernia from doing it, and it's highly choreographed, and it's an ontological break to me because previously, there had been filmed performances, but when you manage to do an entire film that's one take like that, then that is the performance. You are watching the performance itself, not a film of a performance. It's amazing. It's just amazing.
It's one of these filmmakers that is different from everyone else. There is not a school of Sokurov. There are not imitators of Sokurov. There is him, and that's it. And which makes him not only a great author, but a unique personality and a great poet of the screen. Do you know who was the architect of the bombing of Tokyo? I learned through a film this. McNamara, who later would become the defense secretary for
Secretary
Kennedy
of Defense,
and Lyndon Johnson. Actually, Kennedy hired him because of that. But let's not go into politics now. And I learned this in that wonderful film by Errol Morris, Fog of War.
Right.
Let's go now to the second choice. I want to see if you will be surprised as much as I was. You want to say something about it?
Which one is this going to be?
I think it's the boxing one. Is it?
I just want to say I chose an Odorisio film for Antonio, and I chose a boxing film for Antonio because he loves boxing.
But a comedy.
But a comedy.
It's not Raging Bull or I don't know.
I'm actually thinking of these three films as three different versions of post-neo-realist comedy, of comedy that comes in some way or another out of neo-realism. So you see there's something behind it. This is a film about a boxing promoter whose heavyweight champion is no longer making as much money as he might because there's nobody interesting to fight anymore. And the boxing promoter realizes that if he gets a white guy to fight him, then because this is a black champion and a black boxing promoter, get a white guy to fight him, maybe we can get some box office again. And they managed to dig up the only fighter who has ever managed to knock down this champion. It was in a Golden Gloves amateur bout in Cleveland. And this white guy, played by Peter Berg, is now the front man of a punk rock band in Cleveland called Massive Head Wound. And we're about to see the scene in which the boxing promoter, having managed to jigger a lot of stuff, is introducing the new challenger. So there we go. All right, another messy scene.
Why don't you tell us why did you pick this film, besides paying homage to my love for boxing?
Homage to your love for boxing, and really one of the best comic films I know of about the way racism operates, which is not a bad thing to think about. The scam works in this film. Samuel L. Jackson wins because all the white people who want to bet on this white guy are not doing it because they're racist. They're not doing it because it's white, because they're not racist. In fact, nobody in this country is racist. Nobody. They're all just betting on him because they've discovered a great champion. That's this marvelous play of illusion that he manages to pull off. As you can see, it's a stacked cast. With Samuel Jackson, with Cheech Marin, Damon Wayans, Jeff Goldblum, John Lovitz. Later on, you get to see Jamie Foxx.
The guy with the hat is a real famous...
Bert Sugar.
Bert Sugar.
Yes, longtime editor of Ring magazine. Yeah. Right.
The title is inspired by the Great White Hope.
Yes.
For more than 50 years in the heavyweight division, there was no a single white champion. And every 5 or 6 years, there was this so-called Great White Hope. And they all lost. One of them was Jerry Cooney, Terry McNally. And between Rocky Marciano and basically now, with the exception of Vladimir Klitschko, now there is Tyson Fury, the Gypsy King. All the champs were blacks. So it's a joke on the Great White Hope. Do you like Reginald Hudlin's other films or just this one?
No, I do like Reginald Hudlin's film. I think it's worth mentioning that I'm sure Hudlin had a hand in the screenplay. The screenplay is by Ron Shelton and Tony Hendra, so a couple of white guys. But you know, in tone, in point of view, you know, this is a very black film, and this is one of the things I admire about it.
Can I ask you, what do you think about Sam Jackson? I think he's one of the greatest actors. He never got a nomination, never won an Oscar. How do you explain that?
And he never will. I don't think he will unless he does a Holocaust drama. Then maybe Sam Jackson will get something.
He's hilarious. He can play tragic roles, funny roles, violent roles. It's incredible.
Yes.
I screened for my students a week ago Jackie Brown. It's fantastic.
No, he's fantastic in Jackie Brown. And you get to see Jeff Goldblum in this one as well. Though this controverts my son's judgment that any film that has Jeff Goldblum in it immediately becomes a film about Jeff Goldblum. But I don't think that actually happens in this case. I think Jeff Goldblum stays at his own place.
Give me an example. The Fly, for example.
What's a good example of this? We watched a movie the other week.
Deep Cover.
Deep Cover.
Starring Lawrence Fishburne and Jeff Goldblum.
I mean, you get a movie that's extensively Lawrence Fishburne until Jeff Goldblum says, "We'll eat shrimp," while pushing someone out of a limousine and killing them.
It's a good rule. I mean, the Jeff Goldblum rule. I am learning something. Thank you. How about Jurassic Park?
Jurassic Park's totally about Jeff Goldblum.
Let's go to my second clip, which is a musical. I love musicals. And this is a musical based on an Italian film. You will understand in a second. Directed by Bob Fosse. I love this film. And Bob Fosse is a forgotten hero of American cinema. He made few films. He was a great choreographer and dancer. Of course, his most famous film is Cabaret. But I want to mention also All That Jazz and Lenny. This was a total disaster at the box office. It's based or loosely based on Nights of Cabiria by Federico Fellini. Although there is a famous star, Shirley MacLaine, didn't make any money. And I think it's simply delightful. Of course, you cannot compare to the original material. It makes no sense. What I like about Fosse is that he clearly enjoys making movies, enjoys dancing with us. He enjoys... Oh, by the way, Chaco, maybe you don't know this. Do you know why he uses always the hats in his choreography? Does anyone know? Because he was becoming bald and he was ashamed, so he would always cover his head with the hat. Can you believe? And he used this artistically. And the way, especially in Cabaret, Liza Minnelli uses the hat and everybody uses it. It's because of his baldness, basically. So I don't know if you like Bob Fosse, I don't know if you like this film.
You and I almost always agree.
I know. You don't like Bob Fosse.
I've always felt allergic to the spasmodic pretension of his choreography.
It's exactly what I like.
I'm more of a Paul Taylor guy. So...
Even in Cabaret?
You know, there's the hat in this scene, there are the white gloves, everything's about this fetishism of something or another. There's always the fetishism. Look, I because of you, I wanted to like this. No, seriously. No, seriously. But, you know, this is a film that very much wants to be of its time and almost brags about being of its time. But it is so much not of its time that it's almost shocking to me. This is made in 1969, Shirley MacLaine is playing a sex worker, but you don't want to make her too much of a sex worker because it would be unattractive to the audience. So she is a hostess in a dance hall in Times Square. But where were the dance halls in Times Square in 1969? This is a city of strip clubs, peep shows, massage parlors. It was the city of Midnight Cowboy, made in the same year.
Yeah, same year, yeah.
The same year. I'm sorry. It's just,
you have a point here,
yeah.
but if we start, talking about films that hide reality, let me give you an example. One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest. You're all familiar with the film, I'm sure. Most of you are familiar also with the book. The character played by Jack Nicholson is actually a rapist and a pedophile. This is completely covered in the film because nobody would like him. And so, I mean, you have to take what they give you, not what is real, I think, at the movies.
Up to a point, yes. I mean, it is based on Knights of Cabiria, which is about a street hooker. It's about a street hooker. If I want to see a movie about Shirley MacLaine where she's playing a dramatic role, I'll watch Two for the Seesaw. She's fantastic in Two for the Seesaw. If I want to see dancing, I'll watch The Bandwagon.
I agree on The Bandwagon. We found the agreement at
Okay,
the end.
we made it. Okay, good.
That's the best musical ever, I agree. Or at least to my taste. Let's see now Stuart, third and final choice.
You see, finally I gave you a great work of cinema.
Why I think that Larry Cardish has a role also in this, or at least the MoMA?
This is not entirely a lost and forgotten film because MoMA shows it every 4 or 5 years. Every once in a while they bring it out. But this is not a film that you can find on DVD. This is not a film you can find streaming. I had to be downloaded from, I think this was YouTube. Somebody had posted a whole version on YouTube, and so this is an X generation download. This really is a film that's almost unknown, at least in the United States.
Before I ask you about the sequence, I want to pay homage to Dado Carillo. Where is Dado, who did the editing here?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dado. I don't see him, but he's here somewhere. So tell me about this film. It's quite unknown, let's face it. It was presented in Venice, I think, in 1959.
Yes, it's a 1957 film. I want to go to the background of this film. Ritwik Ghatak, the filmmaker, was born in what was then East Bengal in Dhaka. When partition came, he wound up being displaced. The experience of being displacement, the experience of partition runs through all his films. He became, in his mid-20s, the director of an avant-garde theater company. The main actor here was a member of that company, and it was a communist-backed company. I don't know that he was ever card-carrying, but it was a communist company. 1952, the first international film festival is held in India. Italian neo-realist films are shown. Ghatak, Reginald, and I'm having my senior moment with the most famous of all, Satyajit Ray, all saw neo-realist films at that festival. Ghatak made his first film, which was called The Citizen. It was not released. Pater Panchali by Roy was released in 1955. But Ghatak's film would have been there first. It was sort of a Horatio Alger story. And then came in 1957 Ajantric, which was his most successful film, which isn't saying much. He had a long career, which was poisoned by strong drink. And
there is an anecdote about the presentation in Venice. I understand there were no subtitles.
No subtitles.
And you told me about Georges Sadoul.
Yes, the great French film historian and critic Georges Sadoul declared it a masterpiece without understanding a word of it. But I think you can because, even without knowing the words, you get the idea that the action is happening halfway out in the world and halfway in this man's mind. We're in an uncertain territory whether the car is actually alive the way he imagines it, or what's going on. I mean, this is a poor cab driver. All the other cab drivers in town have much better cars. He is absolutely dedicated to this car. As far as he's concerned, the car is alive. But as far as he's concerned, the way people treat him, they treat him as a machine. So what's the difference?
You mentioned Neo-realism. Do you think that the lesson of this great tradition is still alive? And if so, where?
In many different ways. In many different ways. And we don't think of Neo-realism as giving rise to comedy. But, you know, one of the three chieftains of Neo-realism, De Sica, had a career as a boulevard comedian. What is the saddest of all neorealist films? The most heartrending of all neorealist films?
In my opinion, Umberto D.
Absolutely, Umberto D. You see, we always agree. And Umberto D. begins with a comic sequence. It begins with this. It begins with this farcical scene. To me, the key of neorealism isn't necessarily shooting on location, not necessarily shooting with non-professional actors, you know, all the different external things you can mention. To me, what makes neorealism is a sense of proportion. It's getting humans in proportion to the world in a way that, for example, classical Hollywood cinema, or for that matter, Soviet cinema, does not. In those traditions, the human beings are always very, very, very big in relation. You know, they're too big. Neorealism gets people in relationship to things in the right proportion, in that scale. So you can see that in this film, and you can see that in different ways. And I think in the other films I've selected, there are different outcomes of neorealism, which I think is absolutely a continuing tradition.
Where I see the tradition alive is especially in Iranian cinema today. The work of Farhadi, Panahi, and before Kiarostami.
Absolutely, yes. But you also saw it in Cuarón, in Roma, which has made an introduction to your next choice.
Exactly. And I want to tell you a little secret. I had the pleasure last year to have Alfonso Cuarón in Rome, and he did a masterclass on Italian cinema. Yeah. And he revealed that, are you familiar with Roma, his film? The final scene on the beach, which is beautiful, is inspired by La Dolce Vita's final scene. And he used the same sound. The wind is exactly taken from La Dolce Vita. And my next film is a Fellini film, but I did a little trick. I must apologize with you. Because the sequence that I wanted to show is one of my favorite Fellini sequences. It lasts almost 10 minutes. So Dado and I decided to cut in half because I don't want to kidnap you. But we added a 50-second sequence, which is not part of the sequence. It happens later, but I think it's a good conclusion. Let's watch now Roma.
Even at half the length, it's overflowing, I want to tell you.
I wanted to pay homage to Anna Magnani, but of course to Fellini first. There is a famous line in you were in my class, in my Italian cinema class in La Ricotta, where the protagonist, played by Orson Welles, which is of course a self-portrait of Pasolini himself, is asked, "What do you think about the great Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini?" And his answer is, "He dances, egli danza." At the time, Pasolini was very upset, and rightfully, with Fellini because he had promised to produce his first film and then he dropped. He stopped producing. So his revenge to say that he would dance, he was never committed to anything, neither politically nor morally. But I want to take it as a compliment because nobody dances like Fellini. This film, this sequence is perfect. There is nothing else than the joy of narrating and dancing with us. The film stops completely. It doesn't progress. It's him looking. The character of Fellini himself is played by the Spanish actor Peter González, who is enjoying this incredible place. Technically, we are in San Lorenzo, a popular quarter of Rome, but actually we are in Cinecittà. It's completely rebuilt. What do you think? Not in the first sequence, not in the sequence with Anna Magnani, which is entering her own place. I don't know, I know you love Fellini. I don't know how do you rate Roma, which is the real inspiration for Sorrentino's Great Beauty, much more than Dolce Vita. And I think nobody understood Roma like Fellini, and nobody can understand Roma better than someone who is not from Roma. He was from Rimini, as we know, on the Adriatic Sea.
Right. Well, I think it's a film of wonderful sequences. I don't think it's it's not a complete film.
It's not,
but it's a film of brilliant sequences, and this is absolutely one of my favorites, if not the favorite.
I think it's the best, but you're right. There are so many sequences. The fashion show, the church fashion show, or the discovery of a villa while they were building the subway, and so on. It's a mockumentary. What you hear is Fellini's real voice. He pretends to shoot a documentary on Rome, and it didn't make any money. It's another flop, which is quite rare. At the time, Fellini was very successful also at the box office, but his next film was a huge hit, Amarcord, and won also his 4th Oscar.
Yeah. I also want to mention the scene where they enter present-day Rome. After the memory sequence, they enter present-day Rome, and he does it by a tour around the Ring Road. Il raccordo anulare. Yes, with the crane truck in the rain.
Incredible sequence.
And it is, it's unbelievably virtuosic without admitting that it's virtuosic. It's just... It's the ultimate choreographed sequence.
Even this one.
But this one too, that's why I'm bringing it up, because there's so much choreography going on here. Yeah.
There is another thing I want to say. The relationship between Fellini and Magnani, it's funny, because as you certainly know, Magnani was the mistress of Roberto Rossellini for many years until he left her for Ingrid Bergman. And Fellini was the one who tried to keep them friends and he didn't achieve until was not able to do it until Magnani got sick, actually right after this film, and then they managed to speak again. She was upset, as you know, when Rossellini was shooting Stromboli with Bergman. She decided to produce and star in a film called Vulcano in the next island in order to be there and show that she was more powerful and more important. And she hired a German director, William Dieterle, but the film flopped completely. Also Stromboli actually flopped. Now we consider great films or masterpieces, films that literally died at the box office, including Umberto D., which is a masterpiece, but it was a total disaster. Or Bicycle Thief was another disaster at the box office. Okay, Thais. So we almost disagree once, but 5 out of 6 we are...
We pulled it out. It's okay.
I want to thank, first of all, Stefano Albertini.
Thank you.
Casa Italiana. Dado Carillo. I think it should come out. He did a great job. Of course, Stuart Klawans. We have... I still have another episode, as you said, of Le Conversazioni. Next Monday, I will go to Washington. And then we start again, I think, in March here. And we will be in our 18th year. And I'm very proud. Grazie.
You become of age. Just one little announcement. So tomorrow evening, Di Promessi Sposi, Mario Bonnard at 6 o'clock, 1922, silent with live music accompaniment. And I wanted to tell you that I was tempted to continue interrupting Stuart and Antonio and asking, what is the title of the film again? Who is the director? So the great Julian Sachs, our events coordinator, who is back there, has posted the list of the films in the announcement that you find on the website of the event. We didn't put them before. We wanted to leave the surprise of people. What are the hidden gems? Now the surprise is over, so you have the list, and if you want to go home and try to look for them, those that are available, you can have fun with that. Thank you again very much to Antonio Monda and Stuart Klawans.
Grazie.